The burden of unattainable excellence weighs heavily on the spirit well before it ever taxes the flesh. I grasp this reality acutely as I remain statue still in the vast ceremonial corridor of Macragge. My suit of armor gleams with a flawless polish, mirroring only the surface, not the turmoil inside. Each inhalation I draw is deliberate. Each idea I harbor is indexed, every instant scrutinized. We Ultramarines don't just pledge ourselves to the Emperor. We chase an ethos of immaculacy that no mortal should ever shoulder. The Codex Astartes proclaims that flawlessness emerges from rigorous training and ceremony. Yet, as I intone the 472nd stanza by rote, a subtle unrest awakens in the depths of my augmented physiology, something the healers might label a shortfall, but that I'm starting to see as the final remnant of my mortal essence. What unfolds when a warrior engineered for supremacy uncovers that supremacy could be the ultimate imperfection? I am Decius, from the Ultramarines' 4th Company, sworn kin in the Adeptus Astartes, and I can summon all 1,272 passages of the Codex from recollection. This isn't pride. It's a telltale sign. In the scarce moments of slumber I permit myself, the phrases parade across my visions in orderly ranks, much like our formations through the majestic parades on Macragge. The lexicon never wavers, the ranks never shatter. All remains impeccable. But impeccability demands a toll that stays unspoken. I originated on Pandium, a lush farming planet within the Ultramar realm. The enlistment officers arrived when I was 11 standard Terran years old. They evoked notions of valor and obligation, of evolving beyond mere humanity. They omitted how ascending above humanity first requires surrendering parts of it. The ordeals proved savage, yet savagery was anticipated, agony was foreseen, demise was routine. What caught me off guard was the monotony that ensued after the change. Once the concluding gene seed graft concluded and I emerged as a complete Astartes warrior, I assumed the real triumphs awaited. Rather, I stepped into a life paced by audits and assessments, 4 hours of armament practice exactly at 400 hours, 2 hours of strategic drills at 800 hours, 1 hour contemplating the Codex Astartes at 1,000 hours, ceremonial armor maintenance at 1,100 hours. And thus the pattern persisted, day upon day, year after year. An impeccable timetable for impeccable soldiers. Any variance equaled defeat, defeat equaled frailty, frailty equaled transgression. I recall observing a detachment of Imperial guardsmen lounging amid skirmishes during the Bellicane Purge. They lounged in the mud, chuckling and exchanging stories from their origins. One strummed a makeshift lute from salvaged bits. Another dozed deeply, rumbling snores without restraint. My fellow Astartes regarded them with disdain. I regarded them with an emotion I refused to acknowledge, even inwardly. Quote, Livni, Brother Toron declared, his tone calibrated to absolute evenness. Oh, quote one, I countered. He turned toward me. He turned, his features an unyielding sculpture under his helmet. A frailty we've outgrown, Brother Decius. Had we truly surpassed it, or simply entombed it under strata of indoctrination and rite? The doubt persisted like an festering injury. The initial hint of my flaw surfaced amid standard gene seed checks. Every Astartes undergoes periodic scans to verify the integrity of his grafted organs. The apothecaries scan for alterations, decay, or taint. Any blemish demands swift remedy to prevent it from contaminating and enfeebling the chapter. Brother Decius, your catalepsian node exhibits slight variances, Apothecary Varro stated, gaze locked on the data slate in his grasp. The deviation falls within tolerable limits, though it merits monitoring. The catalepsian node enables Astartes to thrive on scant rest. Mine hummed at 97.6% capacity instead of the standard 98.2%. A trivial gap by any sensible measure, but Ultramarines shun moderation in matters of benchmarks. Does this necessitate remedial measures? I inquired, upholding the requisite poise. Not yet. Extend your contemplative sessions by 30 minutes each day and alert us to any unintended lapses in awareness at once. I inclined my head and withdrew, weaving in one more ceremony to my routine. 30 additional minutes of absolute immobility, chanting the fitting stanzas from the Codex Astartes. 30 more minutes bolstering the barriers of my inner confinement. 3 weeks on, in the midst of a nocturnal marksmanship drill, I endured what the apothecaries dubbed a microsecond blackout. For precisely 1.7 seconds, my eyelids descended, too brief for collapse, too brief to imperil any comrade, merely sufficient to slash my aim accuracy by 12% on one barrage. It might have escaped detection in lesser ranks, but among the Ultramarines, nothing slips by. Nothing goes unlogged. Every respiration evaluated for optimal use, every notion probed for its sanctity. Brother Dicius demands recalibration, Chapter Master Calgar ruled upon examining the logs. The procedure shall commence without delay, reconditioning. The very term serves as a softened euphemism, a courteous label for the methodical dismantling and rebuilding of a Space Marine's psyche. Weakness is forbidden to us. Deviation is not tolerated. Perfection alone is allowed. It commenced with seclusion. A chamber measuring 8 feet by 8 feet, stripped bare save for a stone slab and a constant light source that never faded. Situated in the fortress of Hera's lowest depths, where Macragge's very bedrock could suppress any outburst from a comrade whose thoughts were unraveling. For 3 days, I remained in utter quiet, compelled to hold the meditative stance without stirring. Servitors administered vital fluids through veins. Conversation was banned. Inquiries went unanswered. Nothing but flawless, unending hush and the awareness of my shortfall against the chapter's ideals. On day 4, the chaplain arrived. Brother Desus, within your form resides the hallowed gene seed of Robute Gilliman himself, Chaplain Cassius intoned, his helm of bone concealing any trace of the individual below. Do you grasp the duty this imposes? I do, Chaplain, I answered, my tone gravelly from neglect. Then account for your lapse. How to articulate the inarticulable? A brief falter, a spark of mortal frailty in a frame engineered to surpass such bounds. I dared not voice my deeper convictions, that the relentless flawlessness we pursued might be the true defect, that eradicating every frailty had stripped away something vital. No rationale existed, merely expiation. Instead, I recited the prescribed lines from the Codex itself, the ideal reply, the impeccable one. Your insight falls short, Cassius declared. The imperfection lies not in your gene seed, but in your soul. Doubt lingers in you, Brother Desus. Conviction eludes you. He spoke truly, as chaplains are schooled to spot the faintest waver, the tiniest fissure in loyalty. I had concealed my inquiries deeply, shrouding them under veils of absolute obedience, yet they persisted, spreading like a malignancy. I shall eradicate this uncertainty, I pledged, offering yet another flawless declaration. No, Cassius countered, we shall eradicate it as one. What ensued was a routine aimed not at fortifying the physique, but at shattering the will. 18 hours each day chanting passages from the Codex Astartes denied hydration or respite. When my utterance broke, stimulants forced me onward. When focus waned, agony inducers at my brow unleashed punishing jolts. Theoretical, Cassius would intone. A space marine entertains no uncertainty, I would retort. Practical. I shall annihilate hesitation in all its forms, even nesting in my own mind. Session by session, cycle after cycle, the queries that once loomed large dissolved, supplanted by the Codex's unyielding assurance. Such was reconditioning's aim, not to resolve skepticism, but to obliterate the very ability to question. Amid the chants, hypno-indoctrination sessions compelled me to revisit conflicts where hesitation bred catastrophe. Certain ones drew from chapter lore, rooted in history. Others were fabricated illusions, devised by the librarians to strike at my personal frailties. In every scenario, those who challenged commands perished. Those who paused doomed their kin. The lesson hammered home without mercy. In one immersion, I embodied Brother Aondio Thiel, branded for rebuke prior to the Battle of Calth, though crucial to the Ultramarines' endurance amid the Horus heresy. The librarian guiding the hallucination meant for me to witness Thiel's absolution, how his autonomous judgment ultimately aided the chapter. Yet I fixated on his scarred helm, the stigma of disgrace for defying strategic tenets. Even saviors of the chapter faced reprisal for straying. The intent twisted against the librarian's design, yet it solidified my emerging resolve all the same. Perfection demanded more than expectation, it exacted tribute, even from logic. By week's third end, the torment devices became obsolete. My chants rang pure, my bearing held steadfast, my thoughts ceased straying to notions of intent or significance. I had attained the Ultramarines' supreme prize, absolute, unquestioning adherence. Still, buried deep in an untouched recess beyond hypno-reach, a faint echo lingered. It rarely surfaced, and when it did, discipline taught me to dismiss it. But it endured, sealed like a relic in resin, a vestige of the youth from Macraga who once gazed skyward and pondered. Following 40 days of this ordeal, I was cleared for restricted service. My squadmates greeted my return with the chapter's customary reserve. None probed my time away. My misstep went unmentioned. The issue stood settled. I reclaimed my role in the 4th Company, relegated now to the trailing lines and engagements. A quiet demotion. Everyone noticed the subtle undercurrents, though no one dared mention them aloud. My execution was flawless, my loyalty evident, my obedience total. It was in those days of supervised return to duty that I first met the Primaris Marines. Forged by Archmagos Dominus Belisarius, call through enhanced gene seed methods, these fighters surpassed even the veteran Astartes in strength, speed, and endurance. They set a fresh benchmark for excellence, rendering outdated all that the Ultramarines had pursued across 10,000 years. Still, they remained unproven in the fires of heritage that had shaped us. They recited the Codex's teachings, yet hadn't embodied its essence over endless generations of practice. Flawless in physique, they missed the unyielding faith born solely from prolonged service and imprinting. The rift between veterans and newcomers stayed unspoken, yet it simmered in each encounter, each strategy session, each drill. We, the old guard Astartes, carried out every ceremony with meticulous care. They, the Primaris, watched with an aloofness that verged on disdain. In one such ceremony, the anointing of arms prior to a war effort, I stood next to Brother Vexilian, a Primaris from the Gravis armor type. While we carefully spread holy unguents over every part of the weapons, chanting the required litanies, he finished the job with robotic speed, devoid of the awe the rite required. "The armament works irrespective of consecration," he murmured, eyes fixed on his task. "The machine spirit heeds upkeep, not invocations. I ought to have flagged him right then." Those remarks teetered on the edge of tech heresy, challenging a legacy spanning 10,000 years. Rather than alert the authorities, I paused to mull over his statement, balancing it against my own trials. "The rite fosters due honor for the weapon," I countered, the standard rebuttal to such doubts. "Honor leads to diligent upkeep, and upkeep to honor." "Doesn't it, Brother Decius?" he replied, locking gazes with me for the initial time. He was aware. This Primaris somehow grasped my past lapse, my penance, the disgrace I'd hidden under layers of impeccable adherence. It all flooded back. My fingers kept moving steadily, but my thoughts spun into perilous territory. How many more whispered about my flaw? How intensely was my surveillance continuing? Quote 18, I stated, a line straight from our programming. Quote 19, Vexilian amended. Quote 20. Before I could retort, Chaplain Cassius drew near, his skull helm swiveling our way as though sensing the whiff of dissent. Vexilian promptly resumed his chants, infusing his tone with a feigned piety that solely I perceived as ironic. I pressed on with my duties quietly. The queries his comment had ignited got sealed firmly in that fossilized recess of my psyche. That evening, for the first occasion post-rehabilitation, my sleep brought visions not of impeccable arrays or impeccable chants, but of Pandeum from my youth, the swaying wheat plains, the trio of moons glowing like lamps in the dusk. In the vision, I wasn't Brother Cohort Desis, merely the child I'd once been, dashing across the meadows with no aim save the thrill of motion. I roused with damp cheeks, a frailty unseen since my novice years as a neophyte. Luckily, my chamber was solitary, a minor nod to the status of seasoned warriors. If any had spied that slip, I'd have faced reprocessing without delay. I banished the feeling through rote drills, intoning the litany of concentration until clarity returned. Yet the vision clung like an indelible odor, a signal that under the plating and training, traces of my former humanity endured. The ensuing operation led us to Parminio, a frontier mining planet in Ultramar's borders that had gone quiet. Early scans pointed to Tyranid incursion, a remnant shard of Hive Fleet Kraken evading the chapter's earlier cleansings. We arrived in classic Codex array, core units descending by drop pod as support teams locked down the outer drop sites. As anticipated, I drew rearguard assignment, charged with fortifying the landing area and setting up the oversight hub. Sound strategy, isolating a brother of questionable reliability from frontline action, though the humiliation stung all the same. I carried out my role with automated accuracy, guiding the servitors to build barricades, syncing with the Thunderhawk squadrons slated for overhead cover. Brother Vixillian and his Primaris unit were likewise posted to the site, their Gravis plating suiting them for anchoring against any burrowing Tyranid threats. As we labored, he kept a deliberate space, avoiding direct talk with me since our ritual discussion. Armament of armaments. Still, I sensed his gaze fixed on me, assessing, gauging. The initial 26 hours of the offensive unfolded in line with established strategic guidelines. The vanguard units faced sporadic Tyranid opposition, mostly Genestealers and Hormagaunts, which they dispatched with the usual ultramarine precision. Losses remained light, staying comfortably inside tolerable limits. The extraction outpost seemed mostly undamaged, even if its inhabitants had vanished completely, likely devoured by the Tyranid horde. It was in the 27th hour that the routine shattered. Scout teams signaled odd Tyranid actions, hive creatures pulling away instead of pushing forward in assaults, defying established Xenos behaviors. From his orbital vantage, Chapter Master Calgar, overseeing the mission, commanded a wary push toward the main extraction facility, wary of an ambush. His instinct proved right, though none of us foresaw the twist. The Tyranids hadn't withdrawn. Something other had forced them aside, an entity that had landed on Pavonis ahead of our arrival. As the vanguard neared the core refinery, they met not the anticipated Tyranid pushback, but a contingent of iron warriors. Chaos Space Marines dug in and primed for action. The Vox channels exploded with alerts of intense barrages from a surprise assault. The meticulously arranged Codex formation, tailored for Tyranid engagements, had dropped straight into the sights of battle-hardened Chaos troops. In the control center, I observed the strategy screens as one team after another signaled devastating losses. First Company's Captain Amon promptly called for a pullback and regrouping, following the Codex protocols for such crises. The remaining vanguard would retreat to secure spots while backup forces advanced to bolster them. It was an impeccable countermeasure, rooted in millennia of combat wisdom. Yet it matched precisely what the Iron Warriors had foreseen. As the vanguard started its retreat, the real snare activated. Concealed gun batteries unleashed shells on the planned rally points, while Chaos Terminators materialized via teleport right in the retreat routes. What started as a structured pullout devolved into frantic, scattered fights for survival. From the control center, Captain Omen kept directing commands straight from the Codex tactical reserves, striving to restore control amid the turmoil via unyielding adherence to protocol. But moment by moment, things worsened. The flawless strategy was crumbling. The elite fighters were perishing. "Captain," I ventured, defying custom by speaking unbidden, "the foe has foreseen our Codex moves. These reactions, we need to adjust." Iman pivoted deliberately toward me, his face hidden by his helmet, though his stance broadcast icy rage at the intrusion. "The Codex Astartes has steered the chapter through 10,000 years of conflict, Brother Decius," he countered. "It never falters, merely its execution might err." "With all due deference, Captain, the Iron Warriors have evidently dissected our strategies. They anticipate our steps before we take them. We have to counter in ways they can't guess." Silence gripped the control center. Every assembled Astartes and serf there keenly felt the violation of tradition playing out. For a warrior to challenge a captain was uncommon, for a reconditioned one to do so was unheard of. "Your input is acknowledged, Brother Decius," Iman stated, his tone perilously even. "Resume your post." I obeyed as duty demanded, as flawlessness required. But that faint echo, sealed in stasis, had intensified, too insistent to dismiss. Warriors were falling because protocols were foreseeable, because flawlessness had turned into a barrier, restricting our options to those the adversary could counter. I stared at the strategy readout as unit after unit broadcast severe attrition while the elaborate scheme fractured into disjointed holdouts. The Iron Warriors were corralling our troops, turning our own battle principles back on us, funneling the remnants into death traps where their barrages could conclude the ambush's work. Cut off among them was Brother Vexilion's Primaris team, now holding a rig against relentless cultist surges, their spot encircled and ammo running low. Per protocol, they would endure until aid arrived, or until annihilation. Aid under the prevailing battlefield chaos seemed improbable. Right then, I resolved my course, unaware it marked the peak of uncertainty simmering for years. I just understood I couldn't stand by as more kin perished for rigid devotion to rules. Quote 28. I commanded the closest machine servant. Quote Toddy 29. The code checked out, one of countless committed to memory for crises, even if invoking it sounds directly overriding the captain's orders, represented a grave violation of procedure. The servitor, bound by its programming to heed any valid directive without challenge, executed the command at once. Thunderhawk Gamma 3, reroute to extraction point at mining platform Delta and retrieve Primaris Squad Vexilion. Imminent close-range bombardment support incoming on these grid references. I relayed the precise coordinates of the key Iron Warriors battery emplacements, pinpointed via meticulous scrutiny of their bombardment trajectories. The Thunderhawk's flight team confirmed receipt without hesitation, the aviator likely believing the instructions originated straight from Captain Aimman himself. Brother Decius. Captain Aimman's tone sliced into my mind like the chill of deep space. What exactly have you done? I pivoted to confront him, doffing my helmet for the initial time since the mission's launch. He merited a clear view of my expression, a sign that I had proceeded with complete understanding of the repercussions. I have disregarded regulations to rescue our fellow warriors. My response was straightforward. I shoulder total accountability. You've disrupted the hierarchy of authority amid active engagements, he countered sternly. That's a supreme transgression here. Nearby, the control center hummed on undeterred. Serfs and fellow Astartes intently applied themselves to their stations, feigning ignorance of the tense exchange erupting right among them. Across the strategic hololith, Thunderhawk Gamma 3 was already veering toward mining platform Delta, as two additional gunships initiated attack vectors on the sites I'd forwarded. The campaign was unraveling regardless, Captain, I stated evenly. Even amid my dire circumstances, the Iron Warriors had foreseen every standard maneuver. They never foresaw outright defiance. Prior to his reply, incoming Vox dispatches flooded the channel from the front lines. The Thunderhawk assaults had obliterated two major gun emplacements, fracturing the Iron Warriors' barrage coverage. Gamma 3 had pulled Vexilion's team clear from the mining platform, just instants shy of its fall to the foe. In a flash, the battlefield dynamics had transformed. Captain Aimman remained rooted in place, processing the updates, his fury over my rebellion clashing openly with his grasp of the strategic edge my intervention had forged. The ideal soldier and exemplary leader, caught in the vice of rigid codes versus harsh truth. Press the barrages onward, he commanded at last, speaking to the assembled officers instead of addressing me. Every element advance into Zone 7. Will capitalize on the breach. He wheeled toward me once more, his words dropping to a murmur meant solely for my ears. Your reckoning comes post-conflict. Brother Decius, resume your station. I obeyed, slipping back into my role as though the incident hadn't occurred, yet the landscape had irrevocably altered. I had shattered the core principle of ultramarine being, unwavering submission, and through that rupture, I might have salvaged the endeavor. Such a paradox defied reconciliation under our ingrained teachings. The struggle for Palmino dragged on for another 3 days, yet the tide had turned decisively. Deprived of their cannon superiority, the Iron Warriors retreated to fortified holds inside the excavation network. Ultramarine contingents realigned into unconventional formations hammered the opening, and in the end, compelled the heretic legions to evacuate through hidden warp gates. Triumph achieved, though flawed. The resource planet fell under our control, yet it demanded the lives of 78 Astartes, a toll far exceeding the thresholds deemed viable for an incursion of this scale. The debriefing report would highlight numerous lapses in reconnaissance and strategic execution, each to be dissected and woven into updated protocols to avert repeats henceforth. As for myself, no further deployments awaited. Once the final Iron Warrior was verified as slain, banished, or expelled from Palmanino, I found myself under restraint and shuttled aboard the strike cruiser overhead. My armaments and plate were seized, my status and accolades frozen awaiting official scrutiny. I ended up locked in a detention chamber typically set aside for ensnared adversaries, a stark signal of the chapter leadership's perspective on my conduct. 3 days onward, we docked back at Macraga. I was shuttled without delay to the fortress of Hera, into the identical quarantine quarters where my prior neural realignment had unfolded mere months before. On this occasion, though, redemption was off the table. I had demonstrated an unyielding resistance to re-indoctrination, a defect incompatible with the flawless order of the chapter. Chapter Master Calgar arrived in person to deliver the verdict, flanked by Chaplain Cassius and Chief Librarian Tigurius. Their attendance underscored the severity of my transgression. This transcended simple reprimand. It constituted a trial of my fundamental value as an Ultramarine. "Brother Desus," Calgar intoned, his cybernetic fists folded in front, "you face charges of flouting explicit combat precepts, seizing directive power, and imperiling the command structure. What is your plea?" The inquiry served mere ritual. My deeds stood beyond contention, only my motives were at issue, and I had come to realize that logic weighed scant against edict. I acted to save the live, Chaitert, quote 31. I responded, holding my posture rigidly upright even after days in solitary confinement. Quote 32. Quote 33. Chaplain Cassius cut in. The sacred text includes clauses allowing for strategic adaptability amid evolving combat scenarios. Your error lay not in spotting the necessity for change, but in seizing that power yourself instead of relying on your superiors. The leaders were sticking to routines the foe had already predicted, I countered inwardly, aware the debate was pointless, yet compelled to voice it. Each maneuver from the Codex was being neutralized prior to execution. Still, the mission ended in victory, Chief Librarian Tigurius observed, his sightless gaze somehow locking onto me as they followed Codex protocols under authorized command. Following the chaos from my unauthorized move, I interjected, which opened the path to that triumph. Marneus Calgar lifted a hand, halting the exchange. "The battle's result isn't what's at stake here, Brother Dacius. Your defiance is the core problem. You'd already undergone retraining for straying from established norms. This latest, graver breach reveals a deep mismatch with the chapter's core values. This was the verdict I'd anticipated ever since issuing that unsanctioned command on Palmino. I'd be cast out from the ranks, my gene seed extracted, my legacy erased from the annals of glory. I'd turn into a grim warning, a lesson in the perils of any flaw. Yet," Calgar went on, "we must weigh Brother Ancient Vexillion's account as well." That caught me off guard. I hadn't realized Vexillion had offered any input on my conduct. "Brother Ancient Vexillion attributes his squad's preservation and the key battlefield edge to your actions," Tigurius clarified, picking up on my bewilderment. "He's officially urged that extenuating factors be factored into your judgment. The Primaris Marine overstepped by lodging such a plea," Chaplain Cassius remarked, his voice underscoring his disdain. "Even so, his battle history lends his opinion some merit," Calgar responded. "Moreover, practicality comes into play. Brother Dacius has undergone the Imperium's top-tier preparation, excelled in 17 pivotal engagements, and embodies a substantial commitment of chapter assets. Throwing away such a resource outright would be inefficient. They spoke of me like a blade whose inner essence had shown unreliability, yet might retain value. In truth, that's exactly my role to them, an instrument that glitched, but could yet fulfill its function. Thus, Calgar declared. Quote 34, banishment, yet without shame, a destiny surpassing my worst fears, though still a stark acknowledgement of my shortcomings as an Ultramarine. I'd pass the rest of my possibly eternal lifespan patrolling the halls of the Psyker academies on Terra, distant from the wars and comrades that had shaped me across ages. Does the accused wish to offer closing remarks before the sentence takes effect? Chaplain Cassius intoned, reciting the ritual phrasing straight from the Codex Astartes. I met each of their gazes one by one. These exemplars of Ultramarine ideals, flawless fighters, devoted agents of the Emperor, true reflections of Guilliman's blueprint, and in their flawlessness, oblivious to the cage they'd built around themselves, a cage of rules and ceremonies that smothered the human spark the Emperor meant to safeguard via his vast creation. The Emperor forged the Primarchs, and via them the Astartes, not as flawless machines, but as his vanguard across the void. I stated, realizing these might be my final utterance on Macraga. By chasing absolute loyalty to the Codex Astartes, we've forgotten its intent, to steer, not to shackle. We chant its passages, yet grasp neither its essence. Chaplain Cassius tensed visibly, seeing my remarks as more proof of my inadequacy. Tigurius stayed neutral, his unseeing eyes betraying no reaction, but Calgar, unexpectedly, gave the faintest nod. Quote 35. He announced, bypassing my words for the formal log. Quote 36. They withdrew with no added ritual, abandoning me to the chapter serfs for preparations on my voyage. From fear to dread. They stripped away my armor for redistribution, inventoried my belongings, and incinerated most of them, as possibly contaminated by my errant mindset. Just a day after the verdict, I found myself on a warship heading toward the Imperium's core, guarded by a pair of Ultramarines who had formerly regarded me as kin, but now addressed me solely out of obligation. The voyage to Terra lasted 3 months, hindered by warp tempests and the necessity to evade a rumored chaos armada prowling the usual paths. Throughout this period, I endured supervised seclusion, allowed mere workouts and minimal rations, but cut off from any updates on chapter activities or even broad Imperial affairs. They were already handling me like a stranger, withholding even the most elementary details. It was on this trip that I started noticing the ingrained patterns of indoctrination in my own mind. Deprived of the relentless bolstering from chapter ceremonies, without the routine chants and shared prayers, tiny fissures emerged in the fortress of unwavering loyalty constructed within my psyche. I caught myself challenging premises that had always felt beyond doubt, scrutinizing doctrines offered as unassailable facts. The anomaly in my catalepsian node, which had sparked my descent into disgrace, was ruled a bodily sign of some deeper moral flaw. But suppose the sequence was flipped? Suppose the long-buried uncertainties, stifled yet never fully erased over the years, had triggered those bodily issues instead of stemming from them? The apothecaries would wave off such an idea as mere folklore, yet the link between psyche and flesh has been acknowledged since humankind first probed its essence. When we finally arrived at Terra, I hadn't uncovered any profound epiphany or cast aside the bedrock of my life as an Ultramarine. Yet I had started to discern the framework of my cognition, to perceive the blueprint of my brainwashing. And in that awareness stirred the seeds of something a chaplain would deem far more perilous than mere rebellion, genuine autonomy in thinking. Terra proved as daunting as the ancient tales portrayed it, a planet entirely encased in the layered edifices of 40,000 years of human settlement, peaks flattened, seas emptied, land masses remolded to house the swarming multitudes devoted to the Imperium's nucleus. The heavens, glimpsed only sporadically amid the endless haze, buzzed with endless ships ferrying supplies to the voracious world. The Scholastica Psychona oversaw various sites throughout Terra, but they directed me to the main hub close to the Imperial Palace. This wasn't a mark of esteem, but a logistical choice, since Astartes were commonplace there, with Imperial fists and warriors from other chapters frequently visible on ritual assignments. My role matched the briefing precisely. Rote sentry duty that ordinary soldiers could have handled just as effectively, but which the Imperial administration had slotted as needing Astartes safeguarding. I prowled the identical hallways each day, overseeing psyker novices as they shuttled between barracks and practice halls. The majority were youths, their warp talents emerging young and dooming them to either duty or death based on their strength and reliability. These fledgling psychers regarded me with terror, much like they dreaded every facet of their altered existence. Uprooted from homes, enduring brutal evaluations and strict regimens, they viewed my hulking, plated silhouette as yet another cog in the vast imperial apparatus that had seized them. I made no effort to ease their fears. What solace could I provide when that identical mechanism had ensnared me ages ago? Time blurred in this routine, with days bleeding into one another. Lacking the unceasing support of ultramarine rites, the mental molding that had forged me across centuries eroded more, akin to pigment bleached by relentless glare. I discovered I could ponder matters unthinkable back on Macragge, delving not only into my personal history, but the core pillars of the Imperium. Loyalty didn't waver. I didn't abruptly turn to the archenemy or challenge the God Emperor's sanctity. Such wild turns fuel the warning stories drilled into neophytes. Rather, I gradually perceived the mechanisms of authority and dominance with sharper clarity, grasping how the Imperium clung to its million spheres via a blend of sincere faith, bureaucratic momentum, and deliberate intimidation. During my 7th year at the Scholastica, an event unfolded that sharpened these evolving insights. A juvenile psyker, barely 9 Terran years of age, unleashed a burst of telekinesis amid a lesson. Overwhelmed by the force, she unintentionally harmed an instructor. In the midst of one such session, disaster struck when a young initiate in the G cohort lost her composure, hurling a data slate with unforeseen power and fracturing the arm of an overseer. The reaction came swiftly and harshly. Shadowy attendants materialized from the shadows, grabbing the girl and hauling her out of the practice hall to a nearby chamber where they ended her life without ceremony. The sharp crack of the bolt pistol echoed through the corridors. Shortly after, the attendants reappeared, their ornate golden plate spotless, though their intent was all too clear. That same night, the surviving members of the G group were gathered and forced to chant the creed of restraint for an unbroken stretch of 6 hours. A pair of them slumped over from fatigue and were carted away. Neither reappeared in the barracks that evening, nor on any subsequent one. Such occurrences were hardly rare within the halls of the Scholastica, a grim toll exacted to safeguard the Imperium's latent psychic assets. But this time, my view of it shifted profoundly. For the first time, I perceived not the essential culling of a volatile psyker threat, but the wide-eyed panic of an innocent youngster, punished not for wrongdoing, but for failing to master gifts she had never sought. My mind drifted back to the child on Pandium, gazing up at the recruiters with wonder and eagerness, captivated by their stories of valor. I pondered whether that boy would have volunteered if he had grasped the whole reality, not merely the bodily changes, but the relentless psychological molding, the deliberate stripping away of all that defined him as a person, reducing him to little more than a tool in the Emperor's vast armory. There in my private chambers that night, I dared what could be branded the ultimate betrayal for one of Ultramar's sons. I began to doubt if the quest for flawlessness was itself imperfect, if Guilliman, in his profound insight, had meant the Codex Astartes to evolve into a cage instead of a compass, if the Emperor, in forging his Primarchs and, by extension, the chapters, had ever foreseen soldiers so shackled by rigid tenets that they forfeited the very human essence they existed to protect. Once these ideas took root, they refused to fade. They burgeoned during the hushed moments of my isolated vigils, blossoming into a thorough reevaluation of every doctrine I had embraced unquestioningly across centuries. I kept these musings to myself, never recording them in any form that could be uncovered. They lingered only in the recesses of my thoughts, a concealed apostasy that would find no outlet in speech or action. At least, that was my conviction. During my 12th year at the Scholastica, a summons arrived for me to join a delegation of off-world visitors. Such requests were uncommon, yet not entirely out of the ordinary. Imperial officials routinely examined the premises, and the presence of an Astartes guardian was sometimes mandated for ritual formalities. I presented myself as commanded, anticipating little beyond a monotonous day of rigid posture while cowled functionaries went about their scrutiny. Instead, I encountered a squad of Ultramarines under the direct command of Captain Aemon himself. The passage of time since Palmeno had etched lines upon him, fresh wounds marking his features and his power armor adorned with fresh commendations. Still, he knew me at once, his gaze sharpening as I drew near and offered the prescribed salute. "Brother Dasis," he said, employing my warrior moniker over my custodial title, a subtle yet meaningful gesture of respect. "You will join our escort to the Vigilance Vault. The chapter requires your particular expertise." I obeyed without hesitation, slotting into line amid comrades I had long regarded as kin, sharply conscious of the gulf that now separated us. They advanced with the flawless coordination of Ultramarines at their zenith, every stride calibrated, every gesture streamlined. I mirrored their rhythm and bearing from habit, though the ingrained reflexes had dulled somewhat after years detached from chapter life. The Vigilance Vault stood as a fortified enclave deep in the Scholastica, reserved for the gravest deliberations and shielded by both adamantine walls and arcane wards. Once the doors sealed shut, Captain Aemon shed the pageantry that had marked our earlier encounter in the open spaces. "Brother Desis, we confront a crisis where your singular viewpoint might prove invaluable," he stated bluntly. "A Primaris squad has turned renegade in the Palmeno sector. The weight of that name hit me hard. Palmeno, the very cradle of my own descent, and now Primaris Astartes in that same domain, defying their chain of command." The parallel felt too sharp to dismiss as chance. "What do you mean by renegade, Captain?" I responded, balancing respect with a bid for details. "They have ignored all chapter transmissions, deviated from their sanctioned paths without clearance, and disrupted inquisitorial efforts in the region," he detailed. "Reports indicate they pursue objectives diverging from their core directives." "And you think my past defiance offers clues to this?" I ventured, more assertion than query. Aemon inclined his head, unfazed by my candor. "The wayward squad is commanded by Brother Ancient Vez Exilian, the very one who had vouched for me following the Palmeno incident." The link felt significant. So that explained it. They feared my own taint had somehow rubbed off on Vexilian, that my doubts about the teachings had sown doubts that blossomed into full-blown defiance. The twist was striking. Me, deemed too willful for the chapter, now sought out exactly for that very autonomy. "What exactly do you want to learn, Captain?" I inquired, sticking to the proper title even amid the odd setup. "What drives a Space Marine to forsake the teachings?" he responded directly. "You've stepped over that boundary before. Vexilian seems to have done so now, with far graver results. To resolve this without needless casualties, I must grasp his logic." The inquiry struck me as sincere, I noted with mild astonishment. Aemon wasn't just rubber-stamping a foregone conclusion. He was truly striving to comprehend a mindset inherently at odds with Ultramarine imprinting. For the first time in my extensive tenure, I witnessed a high-ranking leader show something like genuine interest in straying from the Codex. Brother Ancient Vexilian, like every Primaris, came into being via Belisarius Call's altered methods. I started sorting my ideas methodically. His imprinting, though akin to our classic versions, misses the layered history we possess. He hasn't accumulated ages to absorb the rites and tenets that shape the chapter. All Primaris endure rigorous indoctrination, Aemon pointed out. They might forgo the decades, yet their regimen is, if possible, even more thorough than ours was. "But regimen isn't the same as lived reality," I countered, "and thorough doesn't equate to persuasive. Primaris get instructed on what to accept, but certain ones, Vexilian included, might probe the reasons behind acceptance." I hesitated, pondering how to articulate ideas I'd refined over years of solitude. "Captain, the Codex Astartes gets offered to us as flawless, unchangeable, a compendium of insight covering every scenario a Space Marine could encounter. Still, it emerged from Guilliman's hand in the wake of the Horus heresy during an era of total chaos. It wasn't meant as holy writ, merely as a pragmatic manual drawn from those turbulent times. Amon's face stayed impassive, though I detected his unease at my line of reasoning. Even so, he held his tongue, which I interpreted as a go-ahead to proceed. On Palmeno, the Iron Warriors had dissected our tenets, anticipated our moves. Vexillion saw that firsthand, just as he saw how my break from protocol opened a path to triumph. Should comparable dynamics surface in his ongoing missions, he could have decided that rigid fidelity to the Codex isn't invariably the best course. The Codex permits tactical adaptability, Amon pressed, within tightly set limits and always needing command sanction, which itself adheres to the tenets. I pushed back, and if battlefield conditions shift faster than the hierarchy can handle, or if the hierarchy gets undermined or sidelined, the Codex turns into a hindrance instead of a strength. By ultramarine measures, I was uttering blasphemy, not merely challenging isolated uses of the Codex, but its core function in chapter affairs. Yet, Imon didn't hush me or call for censure. Rather, he seemed earnestly mulling my points, balancing them with his personal history. "You think Vexillion arrived at that view," he stated at last, "that he's acting beyond the tenets because he deems the crisis demands it." "That's one option," I answered, "but lacking concrete info on the events, I can't pinpoint his exact drives." Argyman switched on a data slate, pulling up a strategic overview of the Parmeno sector. Warp storms have surged in the area these last 18 months, astropathic links are spotty, and transit across systems frequently lags. Vexillion's group handled routine scouting, watching for any comeback of the Tyranid threat we wiped out years back. He adjusted the holo, marking key zones. Half a year prior, they veered off their assigned path to probe an unannounced Imperial ship in the Corinth system. Post-contact, their updates grew erratic, then stopped cold. Reports from fellow Imperial forces nearby suggest sightings of them across various systems, seemingly chasing their private goal, and the Inquisition efforts they disrupted. I queried, "An Ordo Hereticus squad probing possible Genestealer cult signs on Hephaestion Prime," Argyman confirmed. Vexillion's unit allegedly waylaid and held them. The inquisitorial ship had been held back for 3 days before being permitted to advance. Authorities offered no formal reason for the delay. The emerging pattern grew more evident. Seclusion, faltering transmissions, possible alien incursions, scrutiny from the Inquisition, all unfolding in an area marked by a tangled legacy of strife. A single element like this could prompt any leader to doubt routine procedures. Combined, they forged conditions where strict loyalty to regulations might appear outright harmful. "Has the chapter tried dispatching a representative?" I inquired. "Perhaps someone Vexillion could rely on to convey directives in person." A pair was sent out. "Both vanished," Amon responded somberly. "This leads us straight to the current crisis. Chapter Master Calgar has greenlit a complete company mobilization to track down and, should it come to that, neutralize Vexillion's group. Prior to launching this effort, he seeks every scrap of intel available, encompassing your evaluation. The stakes stood out plainly. Deploying an entire company signaled the chapter's readiness for internal warfare. Brother pitted against brother, a dire echo of the grim era during the Horus Heresy. And now, as the outcast, I was called upon to offer perspectives that could avert such a catastrophe, or at least curb its reach. "With all due respect, Captain, my judgment drawn from this scant data remains conjectural at best," I replied. "Still, should Vexillion suspect he's uncovered evidence that higher-ups would bury instead of probe, he could deem solo action warranted. Holding the inquisitorial elements hints he's striving to block outside meddling until his goal is secured." What goal would warrant behavior like this? Imon wondered, his voice implying internal reflection more than a quest for certainty. "That's the pivotal puzzle," I concurred, "and one I doubt we can solve without reaching out to Vexillion directly." Amon paused in heavy silence, scrutinizing the strategic hologram as though it held hidden truths beyond the bare figures. At last, he powered down the device and met my gaze squarely. "Brother Dacis, you are provisionally reassigned to the 4th Company for the span of this mission," he announced with official gravity. "Your role stays as guardian, not frontline warrior, yet your familiarity with the territory and key figures renders your involvement essential." It fell short of the complete reinstatement I'd once imagined, but exceeded what I'd anticipated from my banished existence. To stand with the chapter once more, albeit in this constrained role, felt like a privilege I'd long deemed unattainable. Nevertheless, doubt crept in. "Captain, I must point out that my viewpoints are deemed unconventional by chapter norms," I stated with caution. "My role here might spark debate among the warriors. The call came from the top echelons." "Brother Dasis," Eamon countered, "Chapter Master Calgar personally endorsed this interim adjustment. Regardless of your earlier missteps, your grasp of doctrinal departures is now viewed as a strength, not a weakness, at least in this particular case." There lay the profound twist. The traits that once disqualified me from chapter duties now positioned me as uniquely indispensable. What was once a blemish had transformed, amid Vexilion's defiance, into a strength. It embodied a practical choice, true to the Ultramarine principle of maximizing every resource with efficiency. Yet it hinted at a notable evolution in the chapter's stance toward autonomous thought. "I will fulfill my duties as ordered, Captain," I affirmed resolutely, even as the words barely captured the swirl of feelings this task evoked. "Excellent." Eamon inclined his head. "Head to the armory for your gear. We launch in 6 hours." The operation unfolded with the hallmark Ultramarine exactitude, all phases mapped and carried out per Codex guidelines. The strike cruiser Gorgon transported the 4th Company to the Palomino sector's fringe, from where we shifted to lighter craft for the closing leg. Distant scans had pinpointed Vexillion's troops on Corinth Prime, a verdant agri-world lightly patrolled by Imperial forces, seemingly fortifying defenses near an isolated geological survey station. I joined Captain Eamon's headquarters team, serving not in battle but as consultant and prospective mediator. The plate armor drawn from chapter stockpiles came in raw, unmarked ceramite, devoid of the signature Ultramarine azure or any badges of position or valor. For this endeavor, I belonged to the chapter in name, but not in essence, a divide etched into every facet of my standing. The Battle Brothers accorded me polite formality, tempered by clear caution. Most were too new to recall my prior tenure, aware of me solely as a warning tale from training doctrines. The handful of seasoned fighters who knew my history upheld. The crew maintained a wary separation, as though my irregular status could spread like an infection. Alone, Arjuman sought my input on strategic evaluations while we neared the Corinth system. Vexillion had arrayed his troops to dominate every entry to the research station, he remarked, scrutinizing the Orgray scans. It followed conventional defense protocols, yet with an odd focus on surface-to-space defenses. He's anticipating intervention from the chapter or another party. I proposed that the Inquisition might have sent units after their agent's capture. "A troubling scenario," Eamon conceded. "Should we end up in a tripartite clash, the strategic factors would multiply rapidly." Our arrival was spotted right on schedule. Vexillion's units didn't bother hiding their setups or blocking our dropships from touching down on the planet. They opened Vox channels at once, broadcasting over routine Ultramarine battle nets. Quote 38. The message rang out sharp and strong via the command Vox. Quote 39. Quote 40K. The captain shot back, his voice official, yet without aggression. Quote 41. A short delay followed before Vexillion replied. Quote 42. The site lay squarely under the sweep of Vexillion's big guns. Tactically, it screamed danger. Diplomatically, though, it could be the sole path to de-escalate without violence. "Who do you advise I take along?" Brother Desis Eamon inquired, catching me off guard by asking my view outright. I pondered it thoroughly. "Myself, since you've already picked up on my link to Vexillion, and maybe a librarian, to gauge the warp vibes around the station and log an impartial account of our findings." Ajaman inclined his head. "Understood. Librarian C's comes with. Gear up for planetary drop in half an hour." The drop to Corinth III passed wordlessly, all of us steeling ourselves differently for the unknown ahead. Peering out the Thunderhawk's ports, I watched the agri-world unfold below. Endless crop expanses dotted with tended woodland reserves, humanity's farming grid carved over wild terrain. It stirred a sharp pang of memory, echoing Pandium from my early days before the Tyranids turned it into barren stone. We touched down bang on Vexillion's marked spot, the Thunderhawk settling in an open patch close to the outpost. As the ramp dropped, a welcoming squad stood ready. 3 Primaris Marines in Gravis plate, arms stowed but easy to grab. Quote 46. The lead one called as we stepped off. Quote 47. The facility matched standard Imperial research hubs, modular units laid out in a no-frills pattern prioritizing function over ease. While guided inside, I spotted traces of fresh fighting, scorch scars on bulkheads, gear pocked by fragments, yet no corpses or gore smears. The skirmish here had been scrubbed clean. Vexillion met us in the chief lab, a spacious room filled with intricate scanning gear and a middle dais holding neatly arrayed core extracts and rock samples. The brother Ancient loomed by it, his bulk obvious even among Primaris. Quote 48. He saluted Aemon crisply. Quote 49. Aemon skipped the niceties. Quote 50. Vexillion motioned to the dais displays. Quote 51. Quote 52. Aemon demanded, his inflection signaling thinning tolerance. Quote 53. Vexillion started. Quote 54. Gene seed. Quote 55. From the Adeptus Astartes. Quote 56. Once we blocked them, we uncovered messages hinting at inquisitorial roles in burying the project. We concluded that routine channels weren't safe until we'd cataloged the discovery thoroughly and protected every specimen. Quote 57. You overstepped your bounds. Quote 58. With all due respect, Captain, the intercepted signals from the Mechanicus ship revealed that various Imperial factions already knew about it and were scrambling to seal it off. Quote 59. What proof backs this claim? Quote 60. That justifies holding the inquisitorial ship. Quote 61. You figured they were part of the cover-up. Quote 62. We verified as much. Dumont bra didikfu. Quote 63. The Inquisitor bore codes identical to those in the Mechanicus exchanges. Their mission wasn't the claimed probe into Genestealer threats. They were racing to claim and lock down the leftover samples before our examination wrapped up. So what did your examination uncover? I questioned, breaking my silence and stepping inside. Vexillion faced me, his faceplate impassive, though his stance hinted at ease with the inquiry. Verification that these gene seed traces come from Astartes, who battled on opposing fronts during the Horus Heresy, among legions scrubbed from sanctioned histories. The forgotten ones, librarians say, is murmured, the phrase scarcely a whisper. Precisely, Vexillion affirmed, plus signs that remnants of those legions got folded into the Ultramarines and fellow Loyalist chapters after their formal erasure. The markers point to calculated alterations to hide the source legion designs, yet faint indicators linger, detectable through expert scrutiny. The disclosure transcended mere heresy. It undermined the core pillars of the Adeptus Astartes, implying the vaunted purity of each chapter's lineage could be tainted by stock from the vanished and condemned. Should it hold, that would clarify the rush by sundry Imperial bodies, perhaps even Ultramarines insiders, to quash the find. Captain Aemon paused in heavy silence, absorbing the details in their fallout. At last, he responded, his words measured with precision. Brother Ancient Vexillion, I grasp the logic driving your choices now. Still, you can't hoard this knowledge alone. It requires review by fitting overseers. Quote 70. And precisely who might those be, Captain? Quote 71. The very ones who mandated the project's shutdown. Pressed. The very same authority that had unleashed the Inquisition to seize the proof before it could be thoroughly recorded. Chapter Master Calgar Aemon responded promptly and in person, without any go-betweens. I shall guide you and your findings to Macragge under my own safeguard, he stated. This marked a major yield, validating Vexillion's worries while upholding the hierarchy. The ancient warrior pondered the proposal for a few moments before answering. It will do, with a single stipulation, he declared at last. Brother Ducius joins us as a neutral witness. His background in chapter intrigues and the fallout from defying teachings renders him ideally suited to guarantee this issue gets genuine scrutiny instead of getting lost in red tape. Iman glanced at me, his face impassive. "Are you willing to take on this duty, Brother Ducius?" The inquiry marked a pivotal moment in my life as an Ultramarine. Agreeing meant diving back into high-level chapter affairs, risking renewed clashes with the powers that had orchestrated my banishment long ago. Declining would mean forsaking any chance for a non-violent resolution, possibly dooming fellow warriors to clash over long-hidden truths from ages past. "I shall fulfill whatever is needed," I answered, echoing the phrase from my initial assignment acceptance, though now laden with unforeseen gravity. "Very well, we have a pact," Eamon announced. "Gather your materials and choose a compact team to travel with us. The rest of your unit will resume standard operations under 4th Company oversight." We set off for Macragge right away. While preparations unfolded and the artifacts were safeguarded, I stood next to Vexillion by the research outpost's observation window, gazing across the undulating plains of Corinth III. The vista exuded calm, masking the volatile implications of the revelation unearthed below. "You foresaw this unfolding," I murmured softly, without turning toward him. "Right from when you veered off to halt that Mechanicus ship, you realized it would spark a clash with the chapter." "I had my suspicions," Vexillion confessed, "yet I never expected your participation. That proved an unforeseen factor that ultimately aided our cause." "Due to the events on Palmeno," I inferred. "Back then, you recognized that teachings could be scrutinized, that straying from the path might occasionally yield superior results." "I observed that an Ultramarine could reason on his own and stay devoted to the Emperor's authentic mission," he amended. "A scarce trait, one I trusted might endure in you even after your prolonged isolation." I pivoted to regard him squarely. "And should this affair get quashed in spite of our attempts, if chapter machinations overpower the facts, we will have upheld our obligations all the same," he stated plainly. "History shall assess us accordingly." Yet I believe that Guilliman himself, recently reinstated to helm the Imperium, could develop a keen interest in clues about the lost legions, especially if they imply his own Ultramarines bear their hereditary mark. The reference to Guilliman's resurgence, a topic blending reverence and doubt among the ranks, brought back the vast shifts in the galaxy during my absence. It seemed apt that, just as the Primarch had re-emerged to contest 10,000 years of imperial creed, his descendants were starting to probe the inflexible framework shaping their lives. En route to the awaiting strike cruiser, as we readied for departure, I contemplated the odd parallels in my path. I had started as the ideal Ultramarine, evolved into a tarnished outcast, and now re-emerged as something else entirely, maybe more essential, a link spanning unyielding order and upheaval, heritage and honesty. The oppressiveness of flawlessness that had once overwhelmed me felt like a load I had to discard to serve authentically. Not solely the chapter, nor merely the Imperium, but humankind at large, with its paradoxes and intricacies that no codex could ever fully encapsulate, regardless of its creator's excellence. That might have been Guilliman's profound insight, not the doctrines he penned, but the awareness that such guidelines were merely instruments to steer, not shackle. And in our respective paths, Vexillion and I had perhaps reclaimed that insight, not via unwavering compliance, but through the inquiries that the chase for flawlessness had conditioned us to avoid. As the Thunderhawk ascended from Corinth III's terrain, ferrying us to an unpredictable welcome on Macragge, a peculiar serenity settled over me from that insight. No matter what lay ahead, no matter the chapter's verdict, we had fulfilled the essence of Space Marine purpose, not just to obey commands, but to shield humanity's destiny amid its magnificent, daunting capacity for transformation. In the grim darkness of the far future, perhaps the ultimate heresy lay not in imperfection, but in the conviction that absolute flawlessness might ever genuinely be realized. True allegiance, above all, lay not in unquestioning submission, but in the bravery to challenge, especially at those pivotal moments when scrutiny mattered most.